And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 222. Today we've got the After Dark Challenge. So photos from sort of night time-ish. We'll see how that goes. So we've had 11 people sent in images, so we're going to be looking through those. Meanwhile, we're here live on YouTube. Leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know where you're from. Let me know what you're up to. Let me know any interesting anecdotes, and we'll make a start. Yes, and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 222. So, yes, like I say, we happen to be live, or, well, live as I'm going out. If you're watching live, then leave a comment and say hello. If you're not watching live, but you're watching the recording, you can still leave comments. It's just I won't be able to join them, respond to them straight away. But generally, YouTube does let me know if you've left something of interest. Or if you've left something. I suppose I then have to decide whether it's of interest or not. Yes, where are we? Going off on tangents. I can see we've got a few people in already, so let's take a little look here. April says, greetings from a freezing, sunny Long Island. Happy holidays to all. Viji says, good evening from a cold Chennai. Cold in Chennai? I can't begin to imagine. It's probably still sweltering hot compared to Scotland here. April says... Oh, yes. Where are we? Oh, yes. Nadia says, hi from a bright but cold Fife. Merry Christmas, everyone. Yes, April also says cold in Chennai with a question mark here. Lots of hellos backwards and forwards. Howdy from Texas, says Robert. Janet says, hello from a cold but clear Mississauga, minus 15 degrees C, but still couldn't freeze soap bubbles. Can you not? How cold does it have to get to freeze soap bubbles? I've always wanted to have a go at that frozen soap bubble idea, but it never gets that cold here in Scotland. Chennai, cold max will be 22 degrees Celsius. Even that is, yes, as I thought, 22 degrees Celsius, which would have us out in our shorts and t-shirts, sweltering here in Scotland, complaining about just how hot it is. Yes, minus 15, on the other hand, in Canada, I think is certainly too cold even for us. Okay, more hellos going backwards and forwards. Susan says, hi from a chilly and windy Kirkcudbright, but I have a hot chocolate and mince pie in hand. Oh yes, mince pie. Well, I do have to say, actually, Maggie and Meg have been making mince pies this afternoon, and I had a taste of one earlier. How rather scrummy it was too. Gluten-free mince pies, in fact, because Meg has celiac, so we have to kind of watch out for that. Really tasty though, you wouldn't know the difference. Okay, more highs backwards and forwards. April wants to know what that is in Fahrenheit. I've no idea. 22 degrees Celsius is roughly, what's that, about 74 Fahrenheit, give or take a couple. Minus 15, got no idea. What else do we have? John's joined us from Ohio, although he says he just got back from a tropical Costa Rica. Well, that must be a bit of a change to the temperature for you. Robert says, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. Marilyn's joined us says, Happy Holidays all from Colorado. Yes, where are we at? Oh, Janet's saying 5 degrees Fahrenheit that's the minus 15. Right, where are we? Susan says, loving Woody's Christmas decorations. Yes. The hat was made by Meg for last year, for anybody who remembers back to there. We thought we'd add a Christmas bauble to go underneath the Batman sitting on his hand this time. Anne joins us and says hello and good morning from Texas. And Viji says, it's cold for us. We're always in the 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The only time we do not switch on our air conditioning. Meg joins us and says hello. And Susan says, well done, Meg, with the gluten-free mince pies. Right, okay, so yes, we have people. So here in Castle Douglas, much like Kirkcudbright, it's sunny just at the moment, although the sun is about to disappear because it is, of course, solstice time, or I think it was the actual full-on winter solstice yesterday. Well, winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere at any rate. So pretty much yesterday and today, we get just a little over 7 hours or 7.5 hours or something. It's basically of daylight. Sun's rising roughly about sort of quarter to 9 in the morning, and it's setting around about 3:30, 20 to 4 in the afternoon. So before I finish this podcast, the sun will have set here in Scotland. So that's where we're at with that. And it's been stormy at the moment. Yes, weather, lots of wind. When the rain, it rains on and off all day. When it does rain, it's big rain, big drops, and not very pleasant to get caught out in. Right, okay, so let's make a little start then. So today we're talking about the After Dark challenge, and this was Susan's suggestion because Susan won the Smug Points last week. And in fact, actually, let's do a little Smug Points update. Because what we have is now, on our 2024 all-in, Viji's kind of running away ahead with 650, April's on 580, Robert's on 565, and Susan's on 510 smug points. Whether anybody's likely to catch Viji before the end of December, given there's this one and the next one to go, feels fairly unlikely. I mean, quick calculation, if you got first and you got 30 points and you've submitted, so that's 10 points, so that's 40, and you're here and you leave a comment, that's 45. So there's potentially a maximum of 90 points to grab in the next two. So maybe April could do it, and Robert, if Viji wasn't here, but too late, Viji's already here and she's put something in. So I think it's probably, well, we'll work it out later. However, there is still December to play for, because currently in December, April and Nadia are both sitting on 40 points, Naria's on 25, and the rest of you, if you've turned up and at least said hello over the last two episodes, you'll all be sitting on at least 10 points. So with the challenge this week and the challenge next week, there's still everything to play for December. And then next year, when we move on, again, I'm open to suggestions here, little ideas. If you've got any thoughts about how you'd like to see Smug Points developing, or for that matter, how you'd like to see the podcast developing, then let me know. Ask me, send me ideas. We can brainstorm sessions, something like that, because the podcast will be coming up to 5 years old once we get to April. So I'm always open to ideas for how we can develop and grow the podcast. So thoughts, please. Right, okay, so on to after. So yes, Susan, having won accumulated the most smug points for November, meant she got to choose a December challenge. And she chose the idea of After Dark. And particularly here in the Northern Hemisphere, when we only have, a little over 7 hours of daylight, there's a lot more dark than there is light at the moment. And of course, there is also all the holiday seasonal Christmas lights about all over the place as well. So it seemed like a good one to do. So, like I said, we've had 11 of you send in images. I think I've pretty much responded either with if I've given you a like or a thumbs up in the Facebook group, or I've responded to you with a reply saying thank you for sending in the image. If you emailed it to me, then I've received it. If you haven't heard from me or had any response, then I probably didn't receive your entry. But I think I've got everyone. So what we have then is, let's make a start then, yes. So we'll start with Anne, I think. And so if I flip over to here, so Anne in Texas sent in this image and says, here's a night shot I took in Nashville, Tennessee. So we've got a banjo player looking like he's busking. And it's a great photo. There's something very kind of graphic design about this. I like this a lot. There's, we've got almost in that kind of yin yang, we've got the dark edge over here, we've got pale bits here, but we've got light against dark, we've got dark against light. Anne's gone for black and white here. I don't know what colour the street lights might have been, but the black and white really is allowing us to play with that tonal range. Quick suggestion here though, Anne, because I think this is an excellent photo, but what I think you could do is, I'm not convinced you're playing with a full tonal range that you might be able to get. So, although this isn't supposed to be a critique thing, I think just for your own benefit here, a few weeks back, I was talking about your essential editing toolkit, or checklist rather. And one of the things I said was tonal range. So if I pull up the levels over here, if we look over the levels, what we see is it's all gathered up on the left-hand side of the histogram, which means that's mostly where all the blacks are. And that's fine, we don't mind having complete blacks. But if you notice, there's a big gap over on the right here. And so if we take this and we just drag it up to the point where it starts to bubble up, a little bit, starts to bounce up, we give it a little bit more brightness. Now, one of the reasons for checking this is because very often our monitors, our computer monitors, and certainly our devices like our tablets and our phones, tend to boost everything. So they give it, things look much brighter than they might be. And that means you can't, sometimes you don't realize that your image might be darker than you thought. And if you go to print it up, especially if you're going to put it into one of the camera club competitions or anything like that, then suddenly that darkness is going to play against you. Now, I do also understand that what might happen here is perhaps you've got to be careful about blowing the highlights. So although I brought that up, what I might do is, if I get my brush here, just go in and check. You see, we're starting to lose a little bit of detail here. So if I'll take this down to something like about 50%, so I can do it, just gently do it. Yeah, maybe once or twice on there, on the edge of the banjo. Get a little bit of detail back in the fingers and there. A little bit on the edge of the hat, a little bit on the edge of the jacket and the back of the hand here. So we're not wanting those to blow out so much. We've also got to be careful about this little bottle here, which, because it's already bright, is going to end up blowing different. Now, it does look maybe a touch too bright up here, so I will just gently kind of sweep over this top bit. Now, when I've done that, what we notice is that actually we've now got even more over here. So we can nudge this up even further. Now we can take it up to here. And I think what we end up with is a much more balanced photo, but we don't have to worry about having blown out the highlights because we've masked back in where the kind of critical bits were. So if we take a look at this photo and we go from before and after, well, maybe it's just a touch too much up there. We could just kind of take down a little bit of that corner, something like that. We can nudge that up a touch more because of that. I think what happens here is we now have your image, which is a wonderful image, but I think it just punches that little bit stronger. You now get that little bit more of a contrast. What we are doing is over in the histogram then, instead of going from right over this end here, our light level has come up to here, and this is allowing us to have that full tonal range. We're going from just before we blow out the highlights through to the blacks. And that allows the image to punch. Excellent photo though, Anne. Really think it's a great one. Thank you ever so much for sending that one in. Right, okay, where are we? Comments, we have... April says, nice documentary after dark shot. Susan says, nice shot, Anne. Black and white works really well. I love the pools of light. And Viji says, beautiful shot. Lights and shadows playing. Excellent. Excuse me. Right, okay. Let's move on then to April. Ah, yes, this one. We go from black and white to colour in this, and April has taken this shot inside. So, well, let's see what she says. She says, April says, here is my submission for the After Dark contest. It was taken inside a church in the evening while waiting on a line for a Bethlehem Village interactive celebration. I thought the blue was beautiful. And yes, I really like this one. This one, you know, playing around in compositional structure, you've gone for absolutely a dead centre, symmetrical feel, which I think works particularly well. And what's really lovely about this is we've got the altar and the Christmas trees and the blue light kind of coming off them, which contrasts nicely with the sort of the yellows of the wood around. We've got fantastic pipe organ up here. And then we've got these reflections, and I think these reflections are beautiful. These little kind of patches of blue up in the rafters and along the edge of the pews as well. And I think these little kind of blue reflections really enhance it, and it allows us, you can see especially down here, you know, at the edge of the pews. And what that does is that creates this lovely kind of leading line, drawing us back into the picture. And so our whole eye gets drawn in. We've got all the shadows, but then we've got the reward, what we're trying to look for right there, grabbing it, and everything drawing us towards it. So very beautifully constructed, composed image, that one, April. Yeah, and nice colours too, nice colour balance. So yes, thank you for sending that one in. What have we got? Nadia says, I love this image, April, after saying nice shot, Anne. Anne says, wonderful suggestions. Thanks, Kim. I'm glad you found them useful. Susan says, Blue Reflections are lovely. April. Viji says composition is lovely. April saying thank you, Kim and everyone. Oh, Becca's joined us and says, hi everyone, I'm at a party, but I will pop in when I can. Well, you're here just in time, Becca, because it's now time for your image. So let's flip over to here just while we're here, just in case we can catch you. Okay, and this is Becca's image. Really bright and colourful, but dark around. And Becca says, this is my submission for the After Dark challenge. This was taken in Largs, where the shows along the promenade had plenty of bright lights and colourful stalls. And for those who don't know the local way of so, the shows are basically, it's the fair. It's like the fun fair. So think of the fun fair, think of all the stalls in the fun fair. And what I love about this here then is your prizes. Well, now I don't know, you know, well, there's ducks with the little hooks in the head. So this might be for the you know, we hook the duck as it's going round or whatever, and lots of little prizes from fluffy pandas to inflatable guitars to some kind of well, who knows what kind of dolls and all sorts of things. But it's that notion of the fun fair. And when I see something like this, I can practically hear the music blasting away in the background. You can kind of smell the burger van and hear people, all the chat and the noise and everything else. It's very kind of evocative. That kind of fairground lights. That and everything, but what Becca's done here is, rather than kind of going for a big fairground, she's zeroed in on that point whereby, and I think it's that nostalgic bit where, as a child, almost this is all you see. You know, you kind of blank out almost the entire thing, and you just zero in on the prizes. You zero in on the cuddly toy or the plastic swords or whatever it is that kind of grabs your attention. So nice and bright and colourful, very evocative. Great shot there, Becca. Thanks very much for sending that one in. Great, and where are we? So, Viji says, very festive, brings in a huge smile. April says, this photo looks like fun. Susan says, great fun image, Becca. Love the ducks. Becca says, oh, thanks everyone. And Nadia says, fun image, Becca. Right, okay. So, next up then, we will go to Janet. Now, Janet was having a bit of fun with this one. And Janet says, my submission is this one. Sorry. It was a nearby Christmas light display, but I focused on the front runners of the sleigh. So what she's done is she's shown me this is the original image. So what's happened is you've got all this lit up sleigh and reindeer, and she's gone for the front runners here. Okay, so that's the original shape. That's what she's working with. And then when we flick back to here, we can start to see that spiral shape. And what Janet did was she then zoomed out with the shutter open. So intentional camera movement. You know, we've talked about this idea before, that when you can do, if you go for a slower shutter speed and then move the camera quite deliberately. So most of the time we're going for a slightly faster shutter speed in order to avoid movement blur. But in this case, what Janet has done is gone for deliberate movement blur. And sometimes you can kind of take a photo and for the half second or quarter second or whatever it's open, you move the camera up and down or left and right. And what Janet has done is she's done a zoom, either a zoom in or a zoomed out rather. So at this point, she's zoomed in, gone click, and then zoomed out. And during the course of the shutter speed. And then you get this kind of fabulous light blur and spiral going. So fantastic abstract shot here. So yeah, really almost got kind of ammonite kind of shape, nautilus shape to it as well, which works really well. So beautifully done there, Janet. Thank you very much for sending that one in and for showing us the original photo as well. I think that really helps. And again, in the notion of the way that there's an idea, part of the reason we have these challenges is not just so you can earn smug points, but also to inspire everybody else who's watching as well. So if you haven't had a go at doing this yourself, here's maybe a little thought of something to do. Next time you're in a place where there are lights, play around with that notion of that slightly longer exposure. If it's dark enough and you can get away with something like a half second or a 1 second exposure, then, you know, hold your lens and your camera, and as you go click, then move it and see what happens. And you might end up with something really quite fun. So yes, Thank you. Thank you very much for that one, Janet. Great photo. What else have we got here? So Viji says, yeah, when we become a child and get nostalgic, we see such we become a child and get nostalgic when we see such photos. That's referring back to Becca's. Viji goes on, wow, the swirl and the shutter speed plays a beautiful combo. I can sense extra smug points to you. Viji says, that's absolutely amazing. Meg says, that's absolutely amazing. And Viji says, I love the detailed photos, it's beautiful too. April says, very creative abstract piece. Susan says, that's fabulous, Janet. Great imagination to do this. Blue and yellow work really well. And Janet saying, thank you. Nadia saying, this is lovely, Janet. Right, okay. So, next on then, we will move to Marilyn. And Marilyn found this tunnel of light. She says, as many public gardens do around the world, the Denver Botanic Gardens has a holiday light show called Blossoms of Light. This is a tunnel that visitors go through as the first stop on the tour. I love the shape and tried to get it as symmetrical as possible. At least the weather that night wasn't terribly cold. Well, I guess probably if it's called Blossoms of Light, then the chances are it's more likely to be a spring festival, so maybe not quite as cold as the middle of winter. But this is rather lovely. Yes, yeah, that notion of, you see, at night. I don't know whether it's quite the angle you're at, but it feels fractionally tilted, but then maybe it isn't. I think this might be one of those things whereby you're just fractionally off centre when you're taking the photo, and a little step to, if you stepped, basically about a foot and a half to the right, I think you maybe, and then kind of lined up this line here, then I think you would have got much more with that symmetrical thing. But having said that, it's a lovely idea, a little bit like April's, where you have a symmetrical photo and it's drawing you down to the end. In this sense, I think it quite helps having people, and certainly it helps having the light at the end, because that then gives us something to take our eye past the immediate tunnel, and it gives us this sense of drawing our eye down the tunnel. Sometimes we can see a lovely tunnel, but maybe there's just a blank wall at the end, or it just goes dark at the end, and those ones never tend to work quite so well, because what you really need is you need that little dot of light or something at the end of the tunnel to draw your eye towards it, and then the whole thing feels bigger and better. So nicely done there, Marilyn. So thank you for sending that one in. Susan says, amazing colour in this tunnel. April says, love the colour. That would have been beautiful to be there, I'm sure. And Viji says, beautiful, the arches. So, where do we go? I suppose what I ought to do is that. And just a little reminder to say that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Right, okay, so what are we going to move on to now? Well, next we go to Meg, I think. And, right, so if I do that, and I do that, and I do that, and here we should find Meg's picture. Now, I rather love this one, I have to say. Now, if anybody wanted to know what Castle Douglas looks like, the town in which I live, then this is it. And so this is the high street. This is taken from across the road and down about 20 yards, 30 yards, something like that, from where it. So essentially, if you crossed over the road and then went back up the way 20 yards, you'd find my house. So this is Castle Douglas, and what we've got, we've got new Christmas lights this year. The money's been raised over the past few years, and the ones that hang on these lamp posts as you go down, they've been kind of looking a bit the worse for wear, or not really doing it in the last couple of years. So there's been fundraisers and what have you. So this year's the new street lights, and what you can see here is that they run all the way down the street, and Meg's caught this rather lovely. What I also like with this one is the fact that she's nipped out in the rain to get it, and you can actually see the rain coming down under the light. Now it's taken with her phone. So when we zoom in, the quality, this wouldn't stand for printing up, but when we zoom back out, as a screen photo on a device, I think it works perfectly well. And it's got that lovely sense of light, and you've got the sense of the buildings. This one here is the old Clydesdale Bank, set up in something like 1881, I think it was, or thereabouts. Mr. Pook's Kitchen, which has unfortunately just closed recently. But, you know, lovely old Victorian building, and you can see other parts of these, you know, old buildings, and then there's bits of modern buildings. There's a clock tower right down at the bottom here. But the lights, the rain, for me, maybe it's because I live here, but it is so evocative. This, for me, is like you step out onto the street on a wet winter's night, but the lights are out. This was taken at something like probably about 4:30, 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon or something. So there's still some shop lights open, you know, some of the shops, but because we're here in Scotland, it's dark. And I think as an after dark photo, I think it's a lovely one. I think it really kind of does capture a mood. I can smell, I know what this feels like, smells like. I don't know whether it is because it is just my town and I know it so well, but it just feels incredibly evocative to me. So really lovely photo, that one, Meg. Thank you for sending that one in. Comments where we get Adam Castrello has just followed on Facebook. Welcome, Adam. I'm glad you could join us. Meg says, April says, Meg, that's beautiful. Love the look of your town, very quaint. Nadia says, oh, Meg, this is lovely. Robert says, beautiful photo, Meg. Susan says, love your image, Meg. Viji says, that's such a beautiful, quaint place. And calm and yet happening. These lights are for Christmas. Yes, all the ones that are attached to the street lamps as you go down were new Christmas lights. And Viji says, what is that heritage building? Well, I suppose if you're talking about this one over on the right, this was originally, it was a bank. It was set up as, you can just about make out here, the Clydesdale Bank, set up back about 150 years ago. But these days, well, it was a restaurant downstairs, but the restaurant's now closed. The top part is now actually used by an accountancy firm where you go in through a little door over to the right just here. So it's just one of the buildings on the high street of the town. Right, so yes, thank you for sending that one in, Meg. So next up then, we will go to Nadia. Now, this is a famous castle. This one is Eileen Donan Castle. So Nadia says, this is my submission for After Dark. I was on holiday on the way to Skye when I took this one of Eileen Donan Castle. So Skye is one of the bigger, more famous islands off the west coast, northeast, south, yes, west coast. West coast of Scotland. And if you're travelling out to Skye, you tend to go through Glencoe and some incredible scenery, and you go past Eileen Donan Castle. And this castle has been used in so many films and movies. Certainly it was at least one Bond movie where they had their headquarters set up here. The film Highlander, if you ever remember that one Highlander with Christopher Lambert and Sean Connery, they used this castle here, and you have them all coming out of the castle across the bridge. But it has been used in countless movies. It's a very iconic castle. You've got the bridge. It's on a sea loch, so the tide comes in and out around it as well. Obviously, all lit up. So Nadia says I didn't quite get to the location as early as I planned, and it was much darker than I'd hoped it would be. But I do like how it turned out in the end, with the blues and the orange yellow complementing each other. So yes, this is one of those whereby if you just moving past the blue hour there a little bit earlier, and you've got just a little bit more detail out of the bridge and the rocks around, but you've still managed to get quite a lot there. So yeah, lovely shot there, Nadia. I've got my own shots of this taken in the daytime from a different angle, but to get the really amazing shots of this, timing and weather are absolutely everything, and the best photos you will ever see of this place is either from somebody who lives nearby there or who has planned several trips in order to try and get all the conditions right. But it is a very spectacular castle and well worth the visit. So thank you very much for sending that one in, Nadia. Where do we go? April says, that's really nice. Castles are cool. Susan says, my favourite castle, Nadia, but every time I've been there, half the lights are not working. Meg says, thank you very much to everyone for your lovely comments. Viji says, such a beautiful castle and well photographed. And Nadia says, thank you, everyone. Right, okay, next up then, we're going to go to Robert. And Robert sent in this one, which is quite a fun one and really quite interesting. And Robert says, here is a street photography shot I took while in Paris last month. I thought it was interesting and tried to enhance the cigar smoke. And so what we see here then, we've got this guy here checking out his phone, cigar in hand, newspaper, coffee or tea. Actually, that looks more like a teapot than a coffee pot, I think. And nice, the dark, the lights, the coziness, it's quite fun. Now, Robert said he was trying to enhance the cigarette smoke. And he also sent me the raw file and wondered if there was maybe a possibility of a little bit of critique on this. So I am just going to take a little bit of a detour and run you through something in particular that I wanted to point out. Because what's happened here is if I, let me see, where do I go? If I... yes, if I just actually click here, we can see this is the original. So this is Robert's original shot, and it's decided to lighten itself automatically, but this is his edited shot. And one of the things we find with this is if you look at the original, that the smoke isn't as obvious. There's a bit of smoke there, but it's not kind of coming out quite as clear. Now, Robert said about enhancing it, and by and large, what I guess Robert will have done here is using the dodge and burn tool, so dodging on the smoke, and to try and light where you highlight, bringing up the highlights. However, the slight problem that you have here is because you're kind of lightening either the highlights or the midtones, it's also ended up lightening the background as well. So this wood over here ends up getting lightened up, and it's very difficult. So how do you select the smoke? So what I'm going to do now, Robert, and for anybody else who's interested, who's got Photoshop or something that does the equivalent of, is I'm going to show you a little trick for how to bring smoke out of the photos. So what we'll do is we'll go here, I will open this with Photoshop and take you through a little sequence. If this is going to open with Photoshop. Yes, there we go. Yeah, okay. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll just get to the, I won't go to the same amount of detail to fully edit, but what I will do is, if I just check in here, you've got an ISO 640, a little bit of noise. So first thing I will do, not optics, noise, detail. Remember with camera raw, it tends to default to a sharpening of 40, which can sometimes make any noise, and sometimes make the noise a bit worse. Doesn't look too bad here, but because we're going to be lightening it, and the more we edit it, the noisier it's going to get. I'm going to shove a little bit of luminance in here to just take down some of that noise before we begin. Right, so I'm taking it to 28 thereabouts. This is only rough. I would take more time about it later. And then what I will do, if I hit auto, what's that giving me? That's not a bad. That's kind of evening it up a little bit. Although probably chances are it's taking the blacks down a bit too much more than I would want. And what I will do, I'll just stick the white and the blacks back on 0 for the moment, and I'll take out the contrast as well, because I want to be slightly more fine-tuned about that. So let's go with that. I'll just click open that. Now we've got this, I'll just close ANS there. So now we've got your basic photo. First thing we do, crop to size. I can't remember exactly how he had the crop. We didn't want the whole table there. We don't want too much of that white wall there. We can maybe just bring that in again. So we're talking about roughly something like that. Okay, so now we've got this. And let's zoom in a little bit here so we can see what we're working with. Next thing I'll do, I'll just duplicate that layer. I'll now run back into Camera Raw, and we would add a vignette, I think, just to kind of, we've got extra light around the edges here, which we don't really need, so a little vignette will kind of pull that in a little bit. What I might do as well is, I think if I bring the shadows up a touch and the highlights down a touch, but then if I go to the effects and the clarity tool, then I think that adds a nice bit of, gives us a much, it kind of really plays nicely with the textures there and brings that out. So that's my next level. And then because there's kind of brighter patches, I maybe don't want this table quite as bright, things like that. I think what I might do is I might get a curves level and drop that down just to kind of create a darker patch. but then I want to invert that, so make sure that's black. And now what this allows me to do is paint it back in. So going back to the white here, I will just paint, just so I can paint the shadows back in where I want. So I've got that still at 52%, so I can run it once or twice and just kind of make it slightly darker where I feel the light is maybe grabbing my attention. Interestingly, there's a guy in a white shirt here, but he looks like he's just kind of keeled over and having a rest. I don't want to darken him too much. I think he kind of adds something in the reflections there to the feel of what's going on. So I'm not going to darken him. I might just take out a little bit of that chair there, darken that newspaper a little bit, something like that, get those lights down. And now we're into, and also there's a little really bright patch down here. I'll just allow that to kind of come down a little bit as well. Okay, so now what we've done, we've got the picture to roughly where we want it. And then maybe what I might also do is if I get the levels, again, we can see that it's rather dark, so I could kind of bring that up a little bit, and once again, just like we did with Anne's, take out where the highlights are maybe just blowing a little bit, and we don't necessarily want there to be too much light grabbing when we bring the highlights up. But we can bring that up a little bit off his head there as well, because we don't want to, certainly don't want to blow the highlights on his head. But something like that. Now what we've got, so if I just group those together, then we can see we've gone from that to that. Okay, so that's really kind of drawing. So now we've got this, we've got the picture kind of where we wanted it. So what's the bit that, how are we going to make that smoke? Already the smoke is standing out a little bit more, but what we need to do is, what we're really wanting to do is enhance this. And here's where the trick comes in, Robert. What we're going to do is we're going to use channels. Okay, so when I do go over to the channels tab over here, it splits the red into the RGB into red, green and blue. And so when I click red, what it means is anything that's in the red area, that's the redder it is, the brighter it gets. The less red that's in it, the darker it gets. So the light's kind of yellowy red, so these bits lighten up. There's not a lot in the blue, so that's shown. The green, we can see it's different with the green. And then when we go to the blue, it's different again. Now, the key thing here is, let's look at what's happening with the smoke. If I go to the green channel, the smoke stands out a little bit more in the background. And if I go to the blue channel, it now stands out a lot more. Okay, and we're going to use that effect, the fact that the blue channel is allowing the smoke to stand out more against the background, to our advantage. Now, one of two things we can do here. I can either click this little dotted circle over here, or I can hold down the Control or the Command key and click blue. And what that does is it essentially selects anything that isn't, that it sort of selects the highlights brighter area. Now, it's not absolutely exact. This is going to make it look like there's only a couple of tiny areas it's selected. It's actually selected wider than that. But now I've got that selection. Make sure I bring them all back in. Go back to the layers. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a blank layer. Okay. We'll just shove that on top. And what I can do now is I can start painting in white. And look what happens. And it's going to start painting in. It's going to lighten the areas. Okay. Now, what it's not going to do is it's not going to lighten up where it's dark. It's only lightening up the lighter areas. So I can selectively do this. So I don't want to obviously paint on that brighter patch. But if I just change, you know, I can keep a fairly soft brush. Again, maybe keep it at, maybe sort of drop that down to 39, 40, or I tell you what, actually, I might do this a slightly different way and change the flow to something like 38 here. And this allows me to just lightly touch up on the smoke and not worry too much about lightening the rest of it. Is that a little bit coming out of his mouth there as well? Yep, perhaps. Yeah, it looks like he's kind of breathing here. And so what we've now managed to do is really just gently does it. And you can go back and I would take more time over the detail. Now if I hit the deselect, we can see that the smoke is standing out much more. Now perhaps I've maybe kind of overdone it at this point. It now looks like there's a little bit too much. In which case I can either change the opacity and just reduce, however, take it to the point I want to take it to. Or what I could also try is maybe changing the blend mode. If I take the normal and I run through here and I do something like overlay soft light. Okay, so soft light is just allowing it to come up a little bit and just changes it slightly. But that way you can play with it. But whether you want to go soft light or whether you want to do it normal and just sort of play around, but a combination of the way that you would use the brush strokes and the amount of opacity you give it, and even your blend mode will allow you, so you can see now that the smoke stands out much more. But what hasn't happened, what we don't have to worry about, is where you've kind of overdone it with polish. If we go back to your original photo here, your lightening of the smoke has ended up lightening up the woodwork as well. But if we go back to this one, we've not got to worry quite so much about that. And at the same time, because this is sitting on a separate layer, if I wanted to do a layer underneath it, say do a curves layer or something like that, and I wanted to darken down the whole picture, you can see that the smoke stays there independently. So if I wanted to darken the whole layer, I could, and this is the smoke here sits on this separate layer. So as you can see, that gives you a certain amount of flexibility. So using your channels then, using the blue channel to, in this case, but using the channels to see where you're getting the maximum contrast between what it is in this case the smoke and the background and on this picture ended up being on the blue channel. You can then use that to your advantage to just enhance the effect of that blue channel lighter smoke on this picture. So there you go, new tricks every day. So thank you for sending that one in, Robert. I think it's a brilliant photo. I think it's really evocative, nicely caught, nicely edited. But in terms of that, trying to get that highlighted smoke out, hopefully now that's giving you a whole new thing to go away and play with. Right. Okay, comments we have. Nadia says, nice one, Robert. April says, nice documentary, like the reflections. Viji says, good one, Robert. As always, the narrative is truly good. Robert says, this is what I was hoping you would help me with. Susan says, fabulous, Robert. This is a great story and well edited. The light on his face is great. Viji says, lovely edit. Robert says, that's amazing, just what the edit needs. April says, that's great edit. Adam says, oh, thank you to April for saying welcome earlier. Susan says, the Photoshop magician showing his skills again. There are plenty of people who know more than I do, but I know I pick up various bits here and there, which I'm glad that they are useful. Viji says, thank you, Kim. Edit is good. You're a great teacher. Why, thank you. I'll have a smug moment. Nadia says, lovely edit. We'll have to take note of this one. And Robert says, thank you for your time and education on channels. Looking forward to using it from now on. Well, you can always come back to this one. And later on, once this is over, and I'm going back and I'm editing, in a couple of hours' time, you may notice if you go back and look at some of the previous, well, pretty much most of my previous podcasts here on YouTube, you'll find that they are time-stamped. Okay, so what I will do is I will place a particular timestamp for when I started talking about using the channels to enhance the smoke. So at any point in the future, come back to this and you can click straight through it without having to worry about where was it in this podcast and having to fast forward through. Okay, great. So where are we? Let's move on. And next up, we will go to Sandra. And Sandra sent in this one, which is rather amazing. I love these lights here. Looking quite fantastic. And Sandra says, here's a photo I took at one of the exhibits at this year's River of Lights. This is an annual event held in Liverpool city centre during the autumn half term. This photo was taken outside the Albert Dock and was taken handheld as there were too many people around for me to use a tripod, which is why it is a little bit grainy. I underexposed this photo as much as possible to bring out the colour of the lights, but also to save raising the ISO any higher, and I slowed the shutter speed as well. So that trickiness of handheld in the dark, you're trying to get the shutter speed as low as you can, but not so low that just by going click is going to wobble. Always harder when there are other people about. As I mentioned before, one of the little tricks you can do is if you pull the camera strap tight against your neck, then that sometimes helps kind of use your body as a tripod, and you can sometimes get a degree or two, an extra level or two down on your shutter speed from that. But given everything that you've gone for here, Sandra, it's nice and sharp. The ISO doesn't feel too noisy, certainly at this level, and you've really managed to capture the colours. This light in the foreground here is really absolutely dominant. That's the bit that the photo is really about. That's what you're trying to grab. And then we have the beautiful reflections on the water behind here. We've got the city in the background. We've got the clock tower, little iconic buildings as well. So yeah, beautifully done there, nicely composed. Really like the way you've put this one together, Sandra. So many thanks for sending that one in. Viji says, ooh, April says, what a pretty and unique shot. Nadia says, Sandra, this is lovely. Meg says, wow, that's awesome. And Susan says, the reflections on this one are really great, Sandra. Excellent. Okay, so next up then, we're going to go to Susan's Kirkcudbright Harbour After Dark. And Susan says, I attached my submission for the After Dark challenge. It shows Kirkcudbright Harbour on a dark November night. It looks relatively simple, but in fact it took several visits to get everything right. Kirkcudbright has one of the highest tides in the country, 10 metres I believe, and the tide is only at full height twice a day. So firstly I had to look at the tide tables to get the times when the tide would be fully in. Kirkcudbright isn't quite so picturesque when the tide is out. It tends to look like a muddy hole. I really wanted the fishing boats to be in the harbour and then only come in when they're full of fish. Sorry, they only come in when they're full of fish or when the weather's going to be bad. Then I had to get suitable weather conditions. I was looking for a calm night when there wouldn't be too much of a breeze to make too many ripples and preferably no rain. After several attempts, I finally was blessed with what were the right conditions, put on my woolly hat and gloves and snapped away. For anybody who's interested in the information, the settings were f2.8 force 4 seconds ISO 200. So yes, well, kudos to you there for the amount of work going into it. And I think there's something to be said here that is worth remembering, is that very often when we have to chase the photos, we have to hunt them down. That it's not, or not even hunt them actually, I would say farm. There's this idea sometimes that's being mentioned of, essentially it's almost like there's 3 forms of photography. There's hunting, scavenging and farming. Now, scavenging is kind of what we all do. It's opportunist. We're walking around, we suddenly notice something, we whip out the camera or our phone and go click. We had no idea it was going to be there. We just happened to have stumbled across it and we've taken advantage of the fact that it's there. And that's what an awful lot of photography is scavenging. Hunting is where you go out specifically to get something. You know what you're wanting. Maybe you don't know exactly how it's going to be, but you're on the lookout. A lot of street photography is there. People are, if they're looking for a particular kind of photo, or you're going out and about, you're going out with intent and you are trying to hunt down that image. And then farming is where you essentially have to do it over time. You have to plant the seeds, you have to keep tending it and nurturing it. So in this case, this is much more, so Susan had to check the tide time. She's watching the weather. She's trying to work out when the boats are going to be coming in, all to be able to get the right conditions in order to be able to take the photo. So it's another kind of photography. So yeah, I quite like that scavenging, hunting, farming kind of analogy. I think it's quite a good way of thinking about different ways that you can get photographs. And some photos you will never get unless you do the farming. A bit like, I suppose this is going back to a little bit what I was talking about with Nadia. Nadia was hunting that photo in the sense that she knew she wanted to get it. She's trying to get there on time and she's getting the photo. But the problem was she wasn't able to cope with all the other conditions. The other conditions were out of her control. But the people who do the big postcards and the posters and the calendars and what have you, these will be the farmers. These will be the people who will go back when the tide is right, when the weather conditions are right, when the lighting is right, when the tourist levels are right, so that there's not too many people in the photo. All these kind of things. And it's that different kind of way of doing photos. So sometimes we can beat ourselves up because we see other people seem to have these great photos when we weren't able to get it. But it's quite often because they've been farming the image, whereas we've been scavenging it. So that's a little thought. So yeah, great photo, this one. I will say my only feeling with this one is that it feels like it's cut off a little bit too soon on the left of the photo here, Susan, because given the fact that it was the fishing boat you're trying to get in, it's not just, it's the fishing boat in the context of, I love the reflections in the water here. We've got the buildings, we've got the rooftops, we've got the chimney tops, the lights coming out of the buildings. This is all lovely. This is really nice. Part of the problem here is because the light is coming in from the left and so hitting the trawler here, this part of it tends to be very bright. So this part, this left part of the trawler, is the bit that actually our eye gets drawn to really quickly. But then we're right at the edge of the photo. And so it feels like this photo ought to extend out about another 2, 3, maybe 4 inches, or probably here, as we're talking here, probably about 20% potentially to the left here. You want to have to the left of the photo. Now, I can imagine there will be reasons why you've cropped here, largely because of whatever else happened to be in the photo to the left that you didn't want to have in the photo. But given that, I would be potentially tempted to have taken the photo and then used editing techniques to darken down or remove or do something else with the left, because ultimately the problem here is it just feels like this boat is pushed slightly too far to the left. If it was lit from the other side even, so that actually the left side was in shadow and the right side was lit up, that would be okay, because it would mean that our attention would be drawn to that bit that's a bit in, a little bit more rule of thirds if you like, rather than right up against the edge of the photo. But that aside, I think it's a lovely photo. I like, and I really like that idea of you kind of hunting down or even farming to get this photo. So thanks very much for sending that one in, Susan. And where should we go? Comments then. Susan's, oh no, that was Sandra. Nadia says, wow, this is lovely, Susan. I recognise the area. April says, it looks like a Theodore shot. I like it. Theodore, not totally sure what you mean by a Theodore shot. Is that a technical term, or are you referring to a particular photographer? Robert says, I applaud your dedication, Susan. Viji says, the boat is solid. I love the house behind, and so much research going in adds more spice. I love the shot. April says, it looks like a quaint fishing town. John says, I like the photo of the boat, very intriguing. Susan says, it is indeed April. Nadia says, I like how the calm water is allowing for great reflections. And Susan says, thank you, Robert, but I have to tell you, it is only 5 minutes from my house. Yeah, well, of course, I mean, it's Kirkcudbright Harbour, you live in Kirkcudbright. Doesn't matter. The fact is you still went ahead and planned all the other bits, and you deserve credit for that. Oh, April says, Theodore Emily Kids Show took place in the harbour. Okay, that's a reference to a show then that I'm afraid hasn't translated. I don't know whether that was ever shown in the UK. And Susan says, thanks to everyone for the comments. Okay, right. One more to go then, and then I will work out my bonus points to everybody and tell you what's coming up over the next 2 weeks. Or April says, Theodore the Tugboat. Okay, that's a kids show. I mean, I'm guessing is that kind of the equivalent of Thomas the Tank Engine is with trains? Could well be. Right, okay, so final image to look at then is Viji's. And Viji says, here is a stained glass lamp I took during the festival of lamps called Karthigai, which we celebrate in southern part of India. I love the way the mosaic lamp and light inside reflected colours so beautifully. I wanted the shot to have that bouquet. I love this season, as every time I decorate differently. Last year I did with lamps and flowers. This year the stained glass lamp shades. And I have to say, I think this is really beautiful, Viji. The colours, the warmth, that feeling of light in the darkness. And there's a simplicity to it, but there's a rich texture to it, and I think it just sort of leaps off the screen at me. It's really beautiful. Now what Viji did do is she also showed another shot of this where part of the lamps have been set up. We can see that the lamp that's been taken, the shot over here. Notice the markings on the floor as well, and then with the oil lamp going up. So this kind of rich sense of the lights being created for the festival, time and care taken out to lay it all out. But then what she's done, while we have this shot, which is a nice kind of establishment shot, this is the shot that grabs us. This is the shot which is really evocative. Now that I've taken a look at the this bit, it allows me to understand, right, okay, so we have little symbols below. Well, is that sand or salt or something there which you're using to make the markings of Viji? I'm afraid I'm ignorant of the way you go about doing these things. But I think the colours are just beautiful. Really, they really are. And as a kind of an after dark shot, it's just rich and sumptuous, this. So really beautiful shot, Viji. Thank you so much for sending that one in. Right, where are we? So April says yes, it is, with regard to the tugboat. April says pretty still life, Viji. Susan says lovely colours on bokeh yet again, Viji. You excel at this type of shot. Nadia says, oh, love the colour. The swirls on the floor resemble like smoke. Viji says thank you to everyone. Janet says Theodore tugboat just sank in St Catherine's but has now been relocated. Okay, sounds like there's a whole saga going on there. All right, Viji says, yes, it's designs we do with rice flour. Okay, I thought it was, I could see that it was raised slightly. Rice flour, that rings a bell now that you mention it. And I've talked before about rice flour. Thank you for bringing me back up to speed on that one. So now, okay, well, thank you to everybody for sending in the images. And I have to say that trying to pick a top 3 out of this was extraordinarily difficult. I am so impressed with the level of photography and the images that have been submitted to this challenge. A lot of thought, a lot of energy, a lot of time has really gone into these pictures, and it's fantastic. So I think this has been one of the hardest I've ever had to try and pick a winner and top 3s and commendeds and what have you. So but it's a tricky one. So I think, and chances are if you ask me again tomorrow, I may well have swapped all these around. But what I'm going to go for, I think, is first place. I think I'm going to go for Viji's, because in the end it just grabs, it leaps off the screen. It's in a After Dark challenge, and I suppose particularly what I had in mind with the After Dark, I was kind of thinking the seasonal sense of it. And it's not Christmas, but it is Karthigai. It's colourful, but it's not garishly colourful, it's richly colour. I just love the colour combinations, the blue of the vase with the kind of oranges and yellows and reds, but also, you know, the kind of the colours, little hints of green, the kind of purplish bits, the bokeh. It's just kind of got everything. I can imagine this one doing really well on crowd voting sites like Guru Shots and Viewbug and what have you, because even at a high speed thing, this is something that will grab you straight away. But then there is the detail as well, that if we zoom in, we can see the grains of the rice flour down here. And so this would, and also little kind of bits into the crystals, into the glass as well, these little air bubbles in the glass. It's so rich, it's got such everything there. This would also make a lovely poster if you printed it up as well, I think. So Viji's going to get the bonus 30 smug points, I think, for this one, which I will say probably makes her completely unassailable in terms of the annual accumulated smug points. But we still have next week to go, and you still have December to play for, so don't give up yet. Right, second place. Again, difficult, but what I'm going to go for here is complete contrast. Here is Anne. Anne's photo here, the black and white is dark, it's nighttime. I think particularly Anne, if you just brought up that bigger side of the tonal range, boosted the levels a little bit, allowed that light to come up, and then get a proper contrast with the light and dark, I think that would just elevate this up that little bit. And if you can do that, I think you've then got the perfect photo, which I can imagine would do really well also in the Camera Club competitions as well. Lovely shot, really moody, but it's that graphic design quality that I like. I do like the fact that we've got the light and the dark, and we've got the lightness of his jacket and the banjo sitting against a dark patch, but also the banjo neck jutting out into the dark space over here. So where you've got those really strong elements of light and dark clashing, I think work particularly strongly. So bonus 20 smug points to you there, Anne. Third place, I was tearing my hair out with this one. I mean, how do I choose? It's really, really difficult. And in the end, I've decided to do a joint third, where between Meg, because I'm sorry, this is just, and hey, I'm the judge, but this does it for. This just feels like this is current. This is Christmas. This is now. This is what it's like. It's Castle Douglas in the rain, in the dark, with the lights running down the street, and it's just so evocative of after dark here in Castle Douglas that I just kind of had to do that. But at the same time, I found myself. I thought I can't. It's so close. But what I also decided to do was to go for Robert's as well. And especially now, I think if maybe Robert had got the smoke thing, maybe we'd have bumped him up, and it would still be even more difficult. But hopefully now, I think with what I've told you about the smoke, you can go back, you can re-edit it. And again, I think you've got a really powerful photo there, Robert, which I can imagine doing really well in your camera club competitions as well. Especially once you get the smoke right and you just get those little details. I think that'll be a really good one. So joint third place then for Meg and Robert, who both get an extra 10 smug points for that. Then we come on to the commended, and let's face it, I'm sort of looking at this and I'm going, well, yes, Susan Skimmers, Becca's, Janet's, April. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. We're at a point whereby everybody ends up with commended, and hey, we're just 3 days before Christmas. So what I'm going to do is everybody who's entered one is going to get a bonus 5 commended points. Okay, so everybody ends up getting extra points on this one. Like I said, I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed by the level and the quality that have come into this one. So congratulations to all of you. Everybody's got extra bonus points for this. So thank you ever so much to everybody for sending in your images. I think it's been really interesting and really quite inspiring. And I hope you all feel that you've gained something, and come back, look at the photos again, and see if there are ways that you can try out some of these things yourself as well. Whether you want to play around with that smoke effect like with Robert's, or you want to play around with sort of zoom effects while taking intentional camera movement like with Janet's, or you want to hunt out particular kind of details like fairground places. I think there's lots and lots of ideas to play around with and to enrich your idea of what you can do with your photography. So thank you to everyone. Right, okay, so more comments here we have, and then I'll tell you what's coming up over the next couple of weeks. We have John says, I agree, very tough to choose a top pick, and then there's lots of well dones to everybody's saying congratulations to everybody else, and feeling honoured. Yeah, lots of congratulations backwards and forwards. John says, Merry Christmas everyone, well done with your photos, I'm inspired by your efforts to everyone. Right, okay, so now just before you go rushing off, next week we have the seasonal food challenge. Okay, so seasonal food. Remember a couple of weeks ago I was talking about that. Go back to episode 220 if you need to feel inspired to get some ideas. But basically here we are, we're in the middle of the holiday season. There's all sorts of food, and whether you want to hang around until Christmas Day or Hanukkah or actually take a photo of your lunch, whether your family who are gathered around for the day will sneer at you for doing so you maybe want to sneak a photo of it. But preparations of food, leftovers of food, food still in the packet, food still in the oven. There's so many different options. You can do people sitting eating food. You can do close-up macro pictures of bits of the corner of a food. But food, seasonal food, something sumptuous, something to make the mouth water, or something to make you feel a bit nostalgic, or to go, look at that. There are so many options. But next Sunday means is the 29th, so try and get your images to me by the 27th, no later than, 28th, the Saturday at the absolute latest. But the earlier you can get them in, the better for me, especially because it does tend to be a fairly busy family week here, so I've got to try and fit in this podcast around family events and happenings and all the rest of it. So get your images into. Tell me a little bit about the picture. As you know, we put the pictures up, but it's also really interesting getting the story behind the photos. This is a lot of the fun. I think a lot of the fun with this podcast and with photos in general is the story behind them as well. So tell me, what about the food? What about the setup? What drew your eye to it? Why you decided to take it? Any interesting little anecdotes? Those kind of things are always fun too. And then in 2 weeks' time, the first podcast of 2025, we're going to have our best of 2024. So chance to go back to your folders, pick out your best photo, your favourite photo, and I'll talk more about that next week. Right, meanwhile then, so I think that pretty much brings us, no, not that one. That more or less brings us to it. So, a quick little reminder, if you found these podcasts inspiring, useful, entertaining, educating, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Yes, so thank you to everybody. Have a really good Christmas, have a really good Hanukkah, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Cheerio, bye-bye.